Hello everyone, Stepan here. I'm going to continue the Middlegames series with pawn breakthroughs. I've chosen this as the second topic for the series because I think it's a very valuable lesson to know, and I think most people don't pay enough attention to that area of the middle game and that strategical aspect of the middle game. Especially weaker players such as myself, we tend to miss opportunities for pawn breakthroughs during a game, so practicing that and trying to comprehend the general ideas behind pawn breakthroughs is, in my opinion, very important. Now, I'm going to use a few examples from endgames, even though this isn't an endgame lecture, because I think it might be the easiest way to learn middle game pawn breakthrough ideas through endgame pawn breakthroughs, because in an endgame everything is clear. You sort of think about pawn breaks because there's nothing but pawns on the board. And during a middle game, sorry, if you can try to look at the position in the same way, you are often going to have an advantage over your opponent in that respect. And I think it's very important to anticipate potential pawn breakthroughs and thus anticipate the endgame. And it's also important to spot and timely utilize your pawn breakthroughs. Now, this position you see here is, of course, the French defense, the advanced French defense, and this is perhaps one of the most known and the most thematic pawn breaks in all of chess. Here in the advanced variation of the French, black really only has one move, and that's the move c5, which is a pawn breakthrough. Okay, now let me start with a few endgame examples just so that I can explain what a pawn break is. A pawn break can occur at any stage of the game. Of course, it can occur right after the opening, it can occur in the middle game and in the end game. Now, what's important is to realize whether your opponent has a pawn break, whether you have a pawn break yourself, and what do you gain by that pawn break. Now, this here is a very famous endgame example, and if you've ever looked at a book with chess problems, then you've probably calculated this already. But I think it's a great example to emphasize the strength of a potential pawn break. So there are several things which you can gain with pawn breaks. In this example that we just saw, in the French defense, when black plays c5, black is basically opening up the position for his pieces. His bishop is going to get active, and he's going to be able to have more space in the center and piece activity. Secondly, in this example, what white is able to do is to create a passed pawn. So pawn breaks can be terminal for the other side, or it can be positionally better for the side that manages to push the pawn through. Now, in this example, this is a very clear attempt to create a passed pawn. I hope you can solve this. If you want to solve it yourself, pause the video. The move is b6, so this is a pawn break. Now, after b6, whatever black does, he's losing. He can either take with the a pawn, he can take with the b pawn, with the c pawn, I'm sorry. If he doesn't take, then white is going to capture one of these pawns and create a passed pawn. Now, the point of the seeming pawn sacrifice, if let's say a takes b6, then white is able to play c6, sort of deflecting the defender of the a3 square. Of course, if black doesn't take, then white is going to take on b7, and if black takes, b takes c6, then a6 wins the game. Of course, if the king was somewhere around here or around here, then this would have been a whole different story, but in this example it works perfectly. So here, if white blunders, let's say c6, this is now just a draw, bc6, bc6, and the game is over. And it will once again depend on where the kings are. But in this position after b6, this is a clear pawn break which black can't really do anything about. In this case, of course, because it's so close to the back rank, it's losing. So let's go over that once again. b6, a takes b6, c6, dislodging the defender, bc6, a6, and that's as simple as that. Now, this position could occur in the middle game or in the opening even. So if you imagined, let's say, white having an aggressive Austrian attack setup against the Pirts, and black for some reason having played d6, e6, and f6, you could imagine having an opportunity for a pawn break just like that. Now, if this position is what you want to get in the center, then you might consider that in that middle game. So what I would like to say is that practicing endgame pawn breaks and thematic exercises will give you ideas for pawn breaks during middle games. Another very thematic example is this. Once again, if you've ever solved any problems from a book, then you must have seen this. Once again, if you want to analyze it yourself, please do, and take your time, pause the video. In this position, b5 or c5, both win. After b5, what can black do? Let's say black just waits. Let's say black does nothing, so let's say king to e2. After king to e2, you can play c5, and now if black waits once again, then you simply play c6, removing the defender of the a6 pawn, so bc6, and now b takes a6. If this in this position after c6, if black plays b6, then you can simply take a b6, and once this pawn is removed, you're going to make a queen. The other thing is that after b5, if black takes immediately, a takes b5, then you take with the c pawn, and you are going to be able to create a passed pawn here. There's nothing black can do. Let's say king e1, a6. So a clear pawn break. And once again, this position is winning here because this is an endgame in which the kings are too far away. If the black king was here, then this wouldn't be winning. Once again, you have to imagine this position occurring in the middle game. Let's say here. What do you gain by having your pawn break this way? You have to imagine these positions during a game, and two important things. One of them is that you need to understand if a position like this is going to arise. Now, the chances of having this exact position are almost don't exist, but something similar could happen, and it's important that you contemplate the possibilities of an endgame with pawn break such as this one during the middle game. And the second thing is that you want to learn these patterns to be able to utilize them during a middle game as well, because knowing exercises like this is going to help you find healthy pawn breaks during a real game, during the middle game. Okay, let me show you one pawn break from a real game. So this isn't an exercise, this actually happened. This is white to move. Now, firstly, who do you think is better? Once again, pause the video if you want to. White is to move, and white is basically forced to play king to e2. If white doesn't play king to e2, then black is going to take, let's say, king c1, king takes e3, and you can see that this is lost, black is winning. Let me just confirm that. So if d5, you might think then that the pawn is getting away, but black is much faster with his pawn break on f4, f3, and f2. So f4, d6, f3, d7, fg2. Of course, whoa, sorry. In this position after f3, if white takes, then black can still create a queen. And the point is that white is too slow after f3, d7, because now f takes g2, d8 queen, g1 queens with check, and checkmates shortly, queen d1, queen takes, king takes g2, and g1 checkmate. So this is impossible. So king to c1 can't be played because if you allow king takes c3, then you are basically losing. d5 is too slow. So in the real game, white did play king to e2, and now we come to the pawn break. The pawn breakthrough in this position is very thematic, and this is a motif which you really have to remember, because this can really happen during a game, and I've seen this happen in real games a lot. I've seen many examples of breaks such as this one. I hope you can spot it. Once again, pause the video if you want to solve it yourself. And of course, there's nothing going on here. You can't really break through when the king is here. If black can't move anything, if he moves the king, then the white king is marching up the board and white is winning. So let's say this happens. This would be a winning game for white. Okay, so black is basically either forced to play the move b4 or to play the move f4. If black plays f4, then it's really, you would have to calculate, but I think white is fine here because there's no way for black to enter, so they would repeat the position. So there's nothing going on here. So after king to e2, and I hope you would find this during a real game, the move is b4. And you are employing the same principles that you used in the first two examples. You are removing the defenders of certain pawns and certain squares and deflecting them so that you can create a passed pawn and to create a pawn breakthrough. Now here, whatever white does, it's basically losing. Let's look at the most obvious example first. Let's say c takes b4. If c takes b4, then c3, bc3, and b2 just wins, okay? If after b4 white takes with the a pawn, then the same thing, just play a3, and after this you are winning here. So let's find a slightly more fighting attempt for white. Let's say white tries to run away to the queen side and to defend king to d2, and this was in fact what was played in the game. But this now doesn't work because of one simple reason. B takes a3, and now what does white do? How does white defend? It's clear that if black plays a2, then he's going to create a queen, so black can't play a2. Black can't be allowed to play a2, so b takes a3, you have to take b2. And now king to c2, seemingly defending, but the pawn break was actually a very important deflection of the king, removing the king from the defense of the e3 pawn, and now king takes e3, king takes b2. And I'm not going to go much further into this. I try to analyze a slightly more fighting try with d5, but this now loses for the same reason that we just saw. f4, d6, f3, d7, b1, queen, deflecting the king, f takes g2, d8, queen, queen g1, and in a while you are going to win. So I don't want to go into too many details. It's just key to remember a breakthrough such as b4. So this is a pawn breakthrough which is very thematic and which can happen during a real game, and it very often will happen. Okay, so those are the endgame examples I wanted to show you. Now, the reason why I showed you this wasn't to teach you endgame pawn structures. It was just to give you the easiest way to learn how to spot breakthroughs during a real game, because this structure could fairly easily happen in a real game, and this could happen. I mean, this is possible, and you might be able to prevent this with white if you know this example, and you might be able to anticipate it with black if you know this example as well. So okay, let's go over to our thematic position, the French defense. So in this position, after d4, d5, e5, black has one move, and that's the move c5. Now what this move does, it's creating space for the black pieces, and it's also creating weaknesses. If you've ever played the French defense or against it, then you know that white's main move here is pawn to c3 to be able to preserve his pawn chain as much as possible. So let's say c takes d, c takes d. And now what black has done with the pawn break through c5, after e5, with c5, black has created this position in which white has a backwards pawn which can't be defended and which will soon become an easy target. Let's say knight to c6, queen to b6. So this is almost always what the position revolves around. So another pawn breakthrough in the French defense, I'm going to show you this one in another example, d5, knight d2, and this is the Tarrasch. This is what I play against the French. I'm just going to show you a sample continuation with the main moves, knight f6, c5, knight f d7, bishop d3. If you don't know the theory, I have made the video on the Tarrasch French, you can check it out, cd4, cd4, and now, in this position, black has two main moves, one of them is queen b6, and the other one is pawn to f6. And f6 is the pawn breakthrough from the textbooks. And this is basically what you will usually get during a game. You want to attack the head of your opponent's pawn chain and break through with your pawns. Now, you might do that for several different reasons, to gain piece activity, to open up the position, to gain space, whatever. But you're attacking the head of the pawn chain, and your opponent is forced to react. In the Tarrasch French, white plays ef6 and knight f6, but now, in some positions you have ideas of e5 and breaking the only remaining defender in white center. So with this pawn break, c5, which black played firstly here after bishop to d3, c5, and after that with f6, black struck both at the tail of the pawn chain and at the head of the pawn chain for white, and managed to disrupt the central control. In this position, after knight to f6, you can see that white only has one pawn in the center which is defended, and white is going to have to keep defending it for the rest of the game. So this is what would happen out of a Tarrasch French, and this is a very real possibility. If you get this position, the beginning of the French defense, and if white plays e5, then you are going to have to play your pawn breakthrough, c5. So in some openings it's very obvious, in others it's not as obvious. Let's go over one position which I like playing. I play the Caro-Kann and I play the Karpov variation. I'm going to show you a real example of a pawn break which I have to play in almost every game. So e4, c6, d4, d5, knight c3, d4, d4, knight d4, knight takes e4, knight to d7, the Karpov variation of the Caro-Kann. If you don't know the theory, there's a video on it as well, you can check it out. Knight to f3, one of the main moves, knight gf6, knight takes, bishop to c4, one of the main moves. moves. Now in this position white can play bishop to f5, but it's slightly more risky. The main move is e6 and I prefer playing e6. So now we have a problem. Castles, bishop e7, queen e2, castles. This is sort of the starting position of the variation. You need to play a pawn break here for a very specific reason. In this variation of the Caro-Kann, black is left with the French defense bishop, with the bishop stuck on c8. And now, if you don't play a pawn break, your bishop is going to be stuck there for the rest of the game. You do, of course, have possibilities of b6, bishop to b7, but it's much simpler to play the move c5 or to play the move e5. And in Caro-Kann, c5 is the break you want to play in almost any position, similar to the French, but for slightly different reasons. So this is a real-life example of a position in which you have to look for a pawn break. Another position I would like to show you, wait, how do I get a new position? Okay, let's flip the board, is from the semi-Slav. So, okay, d4, d5, c4, let's just get a normal position. Let's say in this position, white plays here. You play knight to d7 and white plays bishop to d3. And here black's main move is to take b5. Let's say the bishop retreats. You can either play bishop to b7, but you can also play a6. Let's say a6. And now here e4 is the main move for white, but let me just show you what the main pawn break is for black. What do you think in this position what black has to play in order to activate his pieces? In the semi-Slav, black has a dead bishop on c8, which really wants to get to b7 and to be open up on this diagonal. If the bishop isn't on b7, or if the bishop is on b7 and the pawn is still stuck on c6, then black's position is just worse. I've had positions in which I didn't manage to free up this bishop and I lost them. So the main idea for black in the semi-Slav, in the main Meran variation, is to play c5. So this is the pawn break you have to look for. This is once again a real-life example of a position which is always going to involve a pawn breakthrough which will have to be played. Okay, let's look at one more example. This position, you might not think it's from a real game, but it's actually a theoretical position and the start of one opening. This is the so-called check or closed Benoni, and several grandmasters have played it. Yasser Seiravan played it, Viswanathan Anand, Benjamin Feingold. So several grandmasters played the opening, and the engines will always say it sucks for black, but it's a fine opening if black knows what he's doing. Let me just show you how this position arises. So d4 for white, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, e5, knight to c3, d6, and e4. And you have the exact same structure. This is just without the pieces on the board. And in this position, you can see this is probably the easiest example to spot the potential breakthroughs and to spot where you have to open up the position to activate your pieces. Now, black in this position has 2 pawn breaks and white has 2. Once again, pause the video if you want to. I'm going to show you. So b5 for black, f5 for black, and f4 for white, b4 for white. The easiest way to put it is whichever side is faster to open up the position is probably going to have more space and an advantage on the side of the board they've opened the position on. So the check Benoni is a clear example of a position which you have to play the pawn break. Here, the engines probably unfairly think black is much worse here in this position, but if black doesn't achieve either f5 or b5, then black is really going to be worse. Let me show you just one example, one sample game. Bishop to e7, g3 castles, bishop g2, knight e8, knight g2, e2, f5. You have to go for this as soon as possible. Open up the position. Of course, here it might not be the best move. This might not be the ideal point at which black plays f5, but just to show you the idea of why black has to do that. If black doesn't play the move f5 here, let's say the knight is still here. If black allows white some normal development, let's say black plays ridiculous moves such as knight to d7, let's say knight here, let's say here, let's say here, and f4. In this position, if black allows white to take, he's going to be worse. If he doesn't allow white to take, if he takes here, then he's going to be worse again. I think the best way to capture here is with g4, and now white all of a sudden has the second pawn break with e5. So the check Benoni is a very clear example of how to utilize pawn breaks, and I hope you can try to think of ways to open up the position in your favor in your own games. It's really hard to understand these examples because they are quite different from normal games, but this position from the Meran Semislav and where's my Caro-Kann? Okay, this is the French. Yeah, and this position from the Meran Slav and the previous position from the Caro-Kann are clear examples of openings in which you have to think of terms of pawn breakthroughs. And c5 here is a quintessential move which can't really be, which you have to play. Okay, thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the lesson on pawn breakthroughs. Let me know what you think. Let me know which positions you're struggling with. I'm going to post a problem in the community tab, which I'm going to do after each middle game video. I'm going to post it the next day, and you will have 1 day to solve it, and I'm going to help you with your solutions. I think it's really key to study as many positions as possible to gain an understanding of pawn breaks and how pawn chains work, how you can utilize your opponent's weaknesses or strengths in your own pawn chain to create a pawn breakthrough that would benefit you. Okay, so thanks very much, and stay tuned for more chess. See you later. Bye-bye.